Hello and welcome to Swell Season Surf Radio. I am your host, Tyler Breuer. I have a very, very special guest here with me today. Legendary surfboard shaper from West Oz, innovator, creative craftsman, Bert Burger. How's that sound, Bert?
Yeah, no, I'm cool with that.
One of the founders of Firewire Surfboards and Sunova Surfboards, stand-up paddleboards, and foil, and a whole bunch of other projects in design, it looks like. Bert, welcome to the show.
Yeah, cool, Tyler.
How's your pie, guy?
Has what?
How's your pie?
How's your pie? Pie and sauce? Can I get a pie and sauce in this country?
A little pepperoni?
Okay. No, that's not actually an Aussie pie.
No,
That's American pie.
Yeah. I like me meat pies. If it ain't Mrs. Mac, send it back. So, Bert, welcome to New York. How you enjoying it so far?
Oh, look, honestly, it's New York's kind of cool. Like it's look, I don't know. I've been to America maybe 10 times. Florida, and probably done most of the time in California, and been to some odd places, Kansas and Texas and so on. It definitely feels like I'm in America when I'm in New York.
Yeah.
It's just the layout of the streets, the buildings, you're in America.
The accents.
Yeah, it's I don't know. New York's kind of a little grey and square and structured.
Yeah,
is kind of the first thing I kind of notice.
And
there's a lot of concrete.
There's a lot of grids.
Yeah.
So I want to dive into first your history, because for our listeners, some who may not be familiar with you. So I read this story about you. You started shaping when you were about 7 with Cool Lights.
Yeah.
But then you lied about your age to get an internship at TNC Surfboards. Was that correct?
That's
in
actually
Western
correct.
Oz?
Yeah.
How did that go? How did your parents how old were you when you started interning then? Because I
was 14.
14.
Yeah. So
how old were you supposed to be?
Well, the thing is, in Australia, they don't let you leave school. Like legally, you're not of leaving age until you're 15 years old.
Yeah.
So I did an internship with Town and Country Surfboards at 14, and at the end of my internship, they went, "Fuck, this kid's good. Let's give him a job." and so I'm like, "Yep, cool. I'll start next week." And literally, I just it was a 2-week internship.
Yeah.
And so at the end of that, I was supposed to go back to school, but I didn't go back to school. I just came back and started work and said, "Yeah, I'm 15. It's all good." And then it was maybe about look, this would have been June, July. I don't know how school works in America, but our school year in Australia basically runs from like February to end of November, early December. That's our school year. So look, it might have been like June-ish when I accepted the job, and probably about 4 months had passed, and my boss comes to me and he said, "Oh, I got this phone call from your principal that you've been missing from school for 4 months." And I'm like, "Oh, fuck. They're onto me." And so he said, "Look, you just go back, do your last 2 weeks, get that piece of paper, and then, your job's still here."
Wow.
So I went back to school for the last 2 weeks, got that little piece of paper in that envelope, which has never been opened since. I don't know where it is now, but I've never used that piece of paper in my life. So, yeah.
What were your parents like first in terms of having to tell them that, and
No,
they
honestly,
were surfers.
My mum was a surfer.
Yeah.
I come from a whole family of surfers. It actually started with my grandfather.
Really?
I don't know how.
Your grandfather?
Yeah, so I don't know.
Let's go far back. Let's go way back.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, look, so I was born in 1968, right? So, but even then, I was already a third-generation surfer.
Yeah.
So my grandfather immigrated to Australia from Holland in 1950, and he brought all his kids with him, which was my mum was one of those. And so, his kids ranged in age from like 3 months old through to like 16 years old. Mm-hmm. So that's like my uncles and aunties and my mother. And he moved into an area in Western Australia called Cottesloe Beach.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with Cottesloe.
Okay, so Cottesloe...
Beautiful.
In Western Australia, it was kind of like where the surf scene began. So there's my grandparents, grandmother, grandfather. They move into Cottesloe. He's got a good paying job as an engineer. He brings up his kids there. He decides that he wants to become a surfer. Oh, wow. So in his early 40s, he goes out and buys a surfboard.
What year would that have been, you think?
Oh, that would have been about 53, something like that. Yeah.
So that was before the Malibus really came down or anything. He would have been like on a pretty big board.
Yeah, it was like hollow plywood board,
like kook box style.
Yeah, but there was actually a surf scene in Cottesloe that sort of, like, as I know from other older like historians in Western Australia, there was a surf scene that started to emerge there around about the 20s.
Whoa! And
they used to make these boards. Oh, well, they were like stand-up paddle boards, but instead of a single bladed paddle, it was kind of like a kayak paddle,
like goat boat style, or
well, it was standing up.
Wow.
Okay, so the board was basically like an aeroplane wing frame.
Okay.
And then stretched around the outside of that was a canvas, like you'd make an aeroplane wing, like First World War technology. And then that canvas was sealed with something they called dope. I don't know what that was.
So, right, yeah.
It was some sort of lacquer or some sort of fluid that would dry and would seal the canvas.
Wow.
So it was like a canvas frame, a light wooden frame covered in a canvas. And then they would stand on these boards, and they were kind of like a modern day stand-up paddle board, and they would sort of stand parallel and paddle it with like a double-bladed, like elongated or stretched out like kayak paddle or canoe paddle. Yeah. And so there was that sort of surf scene there in Cottesloe, like in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s.
I had no clue.
Yeah.
I always thought like surfing, like freshwater beach on the East Coast, that was like ground zero for surfing, but it sounds like had a whole separate thing going on.
Yeah, well, look, I honestly, like, there was an old board builder in Western Australia. He's actually still alive, Len Dibben. He was kind of one of my mentors over the years. And he is a little bit of like a surfing historian. And he put together a really good article maybe 15 years ago that I read on the origins of surfing in Western Australia. And I was like, wow, I had no idea, because this was like literally when my grandparents were like toddlers. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And so then your mother then surfed.
Okay, so my mum, so my uncle. So I basically have an auntie and three uncles and a mother. So in my grandparents' family, there was 2 girls, 3 boys. They all surfed. So my grandfather surfed. Obviously, his kids are going to become surfers. And that's what happened. So they all grew up in this sort of emerging 50s, early 60s emerging surf culture in Western Australia. And they all became surfers. So when I was born, man, everybody surfed. Like, everybody in my family surfed. Yeah, apart from my dad. But that... Yeah.
Apart from it, so was there conflict then between your parents?
Well, there was. Okay, so all right, so I get born into a surf family. So on my mum's side, all surfers.
Yeah.
Bronzed, Aussie, tanned, muscular, beach people. My mum went back to Holland when she was a late teenager. I think she might have been 19 or 20 years old. She went back there and got a job in a hotel, met my dad. My dad comes to Australia. I get conceived. And he was like this skinny white Dutch guy. And I remember, later on, I think we'll get to this later, when eventually I did meet my dad, because my mum and dad didn't stick together very long.
All right.
But my dad always told me that he felt that he never fitted in to our family because of the fact that, they're all these tanned, beach-going surfers.
Yeah.
And he was like this skinny white accountant-looking guy. and he kind of felt like he just didn't belong. So anyway, he took off when I was about 18 months old.
Wow.
And that relationship kind of fizzled. And look, I don't know. I suppose it happens in a lot of people's lives where, their parents split up and the parent that you stay with is the good guy and the parent that left is the bad guy. So that was always the story I got.
Yeah.
And, I think it's a common scenario, the sole parent propaganda or whatever you'd like to call it.
It's your own interpretation too, because you only see them.
Yeah.
And if they're pretty nice to you too. Like, it depends too. Obviously, you could be stuck with like a parent that is pretty bad. But I would imagine that's all you see and that's all you know.
Yeah. So, so with growing up with my mum's side of the family, man, they were just a really intense, athletic waterman family. And I just kind of got thrown in the deep end, literally. I mean, my mum had this crazy method of teaching, which was just like, I'm 3 or 4 years old and she's just dragging me out to giant storm surf. And, I'm like just getting pushed into waves, or I'm just getting thrown into the ocean. And it's just like, oh, yeah, he's been under for a few minutes. All right, I better go search around and try and find him. And even with my uncle, if I think back to some of the stuff that my uncle did with me, it'd be bordering on child abuse, like 6 years old, and he's dragging me into giant waves, and he had this long blonde hair. And so he would say, hold on to my hair and I'll swim out and body surf some waves and you stand on my back and you surf me. Right? And so what I would do is I would hold onto his hair, kind of like how you'd hold onto some horse reins, right? And he would stroke into a wave, body surfing, and then once I felt he was going, I'd jump to my feet. And so I'd hold the handles and my back, and I'm telling you, jumping up on a surfboard is easy. Jumping up on a human being is actually difficult. I mean, his back would be really slippery. I actually suggested later that we should wax his back because, as I'm trying to get to my feet are sliding everywhere, but my back foot would kind of slide down to the small of his butt, and my front foot would lock in between his shoulder blades, and I'd grab his long hair, in these handles, and I'd just be like, woo, all right, and I'd surf my uncle when I was 6 years old.
Sounds like you can make a new traction pad, butt pads, out of that.
Yeah. So,
Uncle, off the lip, pulling on the left of the hair, do a cutback with the right.
Sure, I should have. Yeah, look, at the time, I didn't think that far ahead. I wasn't that advanced, but for sure, pull left, pull right, and there's a change of direction.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So when did you... I mean, you started pretty young on a Kool-Aid, but when was it where you were just like, this shaping, making a board? When did that resonate with you? Can you remember the moment when you were just like, oh, this is what I want to do?
Oh, look, I think... Look, when I was about 12...
Yeah.
Before the age of 12... I didn't realise that surfboard making was even a career. Mm-hmm. It just hadn't clicked yet. I don't know, how young kids are when they become aware of the economic reality of the world and where products come from and all the rest of it. But yeah, so I think at the age of 12, I said, yep, I want to be a surfboard builder. I want to do this as a career. When I was a little kid, sort of before the age of 12, most people thought that